We're going to talk about CSS today. We're going to know what CSS is, and we're also going to know its structure and basic syntax so we can start using it in our web projects. CSS is the language of style. CSS is short for Cascading Style Sheet. And the current version of CSS is CSS 3. Just like HTML, CSS constantly evolves. They keep adding features to it to suit the needs of developers. I use a lot of different analogies to teach the difference between HTML and CSS. HTML can be considered to be the content or the structure, whereas CSS can be considered to be the display or presentation. So in this example, I have a boring structural Lego guy on the left. He just has a head, a body, feet, hands. But the right version is once we add CSS. See how he's in his Sunday best? See how he's got an awesome suit on and flowers, and he's ready to be presented to the world. CSS is the presentation. It isn't the content that goes on the page, but it is how to display that content. What normally happens is you create things called CSS rules, and you will place them in style sheets. These rules dictate how a page should be displayed, how that content should look. Here's another analogy I use. Think of a famous Hollywood actress. She doesn't look like that when she leaves the house every morning. It takes a lot of work. It takes hair, makeup, wardrobe to look like this. So what the Hollywood actress looks like when she leaves the house, all bummy, is HTML. That's just her content. But once you add hair, makeup, wardrobe, styling, all of a sudden you have HTML plus CSS. So you can think about HTML and CSS in this way. What happens is the web browser will marry the HTML you write with the CSS rules you write. So in this case, I have some HTML. I have a paragraph. It says it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And then I have some style rule. This one says any paragraph element, color its text red. When you combine those two things, you would see something on the page like this. You have the content, and then you have how to display it. So this is how CSS works. Your web browser stitches it together with HTML. I've got a great video here. I want you to watch it. Make sure you always write down and answer the 3 questions on the right so that you fully get the most out of the video. So CSS rules are made up of properties and values. So what happens is for any element you put on the page, you can set a number of different properties, and you can set those properties to different values. So here's an example. I have some content on the page. I can change the color property, the font family property, the font size property. So these properties define how elements are displayed, and you can set them to different values to control them. So the whole purpose of CSS is to set these properties to the values you want. When you do that, you can control the display of the page. Depending upon the HTML element that's involved, they may have different properties. But there are a lot of properties that all elements seem to share. So how do I set properties? I set properties by using a property name and value pair. So on the left side, I declare which property I want to set, and on the right side, I tell CSS what value to set it to. If I have more than one property to set, I terminate each property name value pair with a semicolon. So these are called CSS declarations. Every single property value combination that you want to set for an element is considered to be a CSS declaration. What does this CSS declaration look like? It looks like this. You have a property, a value, separated by a colon, and then if you have more than one property to set, you will terminate each declaration with a semicolon. Now what happens is we take our CSS declarations and we may have more than one of them. So we place them into what are called blocks. We're grouping our CSS declarations. So here I have 1, 2, 3 different declarations, and they are grouped using opening and closing curly braces. So this is what's called a CSS declaration block. Once I have grouped all my CSS declarations together, we use curly braces to delimit when the group starts and when it ends. This is an opening curly brace, this is a closing curly brace. The last piece, CSS selectors. We just talked about what properties are and how to set those properties, but we also need to target the HTML elements that we want to style. So we have something called CSS selectors, and they do exactly what it sounds like. They select the elements on the page to apply those style declarations to. So you're basically picking, what do I want to style? And there are many different types of selectors that allow you to really control what gets set, when, and how. So you can think of CSS selectors as how you pick the elements that you want to style. So a selector looks something like this. Notice how I've got my P right here. What this is saying is that I want to apply these 3 style declarations to all of my paragraph elements. So any paragraph element on the page will have its text colored red, its font family will be Arial, and its font size will be 16. So I have my CSS declaration group here, and then I add a selector. Once I add a selector, I have what's called a CSS rule or CSS rule set. And all the style sheet consists of, all CSS is one or more CSS rules. So this is what a complete CSS rule looks like. It has a selector, it has an opening curly brace, and then there are as many different declarations of style that you want, and then you close with a closing curly brace. Those are CSS selectors. And as I mentioned earlier, there are many different types. We won't go into all of them in this class because there's just too many. Here's a video which goes into the most basic CSS selectors that you're probably going to want to know. So let's take a moment to put all this together. What is a CSS rule? A CSS rule is this combination of selectors and declaration blocks. So what happens is the selector is saying, what do I want to style? And the declaration block is saying, how do I want to style it? It's important to understand that this is really all CSS is. You're creating CSS rules. You're deciding what on the page do I want to style and how do I want to style it. Another thing that's important to note is that CSS rule and CSS rule set are interchangeable phrases. They mean the same thing, it's just different vernacular. So once again, a CSS rule, often called a rule set, is a combination of selector and declaration block. The declaration block starts with opening curly braces, closes with a closing curly brace, and has one or more CSS declarations in it. So when you combine selectors with a declaration block, you have a CSS rule. Okay, I have a link here. This time when you go to the Mozilla Developer Network, you're going to be looking at CSS syntax. So pay really close attention to the vocabulary that they use and the examples throughout, just to get a better handle on what CSS really is. And as always, I have a hands-on project where you prove to me that you can apply what you learned in this video/presentation. So please let me know if you have any problems whatsoever, and I would be more than happy to help. Once you are done looking at the developer network, once you are done with your hands-on activity, you are going to register for Codecademy and you're going to complete the CSS in Overview module. This is going to get you a really good primer on what CSS is. Basically follow really closely, reading closely, and do whatever the tutorial says. If you have problems, please grab me and I would love to help you. So all of these things together are going to give you a great foundation for what CSS is, and you will know the basics of CSS.